The scent of rain and rejection clung to the stone walls of her home. Leoraine of the fallen house of Cygnus knew that smell better than any other. It was the permanent perfume of her failure. At 19, when other she-wolves celebrated their first shift, their bodies finally aligning with the spirit of their beast, Leoraine had felt nothing. The moon had called, and her blood had not answered. She was wolfless, a broken thing in a society that worshipped strength. Her father, his face a mask of grim disappointment, had not looked at her as he spoke. He addressed the wall, the tapestries, anything but the daughter who was the living symbol of his disgrace. "The Alpha King has accepted the tribute," he had said, his voice brittle. "You will be his bride. This will restore a measure of honor to our name." Honor! The word was a bitter stone in her throat. She was not a tribute to honor. She was a debt being paid. Her father's failed rebellion against the throne a year prior had cost them everything. Their lands, their standing, their pride. Now, it was costing him his daughter. She was being sent to the Shadow King, Lord Dravenor, a man whose name was only ever spoken in hushed, fearful whispers. They said he was a monster, a ruthless king who had crushed her father's uprising without a flicker of mercy. They said no one had seen his wolf in decades, that some terrible curse festered within him. He was a phantom who ruled from a fortress of black stone and perpetual twilight, and she was being sent to his bed. "Do not disgrace us further," her mother had whispered later, pressing a cold hand to Leoraine's cheek. Her eyes were hard, not with malice, but with the weary resignation of a woman who had lost too much. "Be a good wife. Be quiet. Be obedient. Survive. Survive." That was the only goal. Leoraine looked at her reflection in the polished silver of a water basin. Pale skin, wide gray eyes that saw too much, and a spirit that felt infinitesimally small. She possessed no claws, no fangs, no beast of righteous fury waiting to be unleashed. All she had were stories, tales her grandmother had taught her, whispered in the dark of her childhood bedroom. Stories of ancient magic, of love that healed curses, of courage found in the most unlikely of hearts. They were frivolous things, useless in a world of alphas and omegas, of power and dominance. They were all she had left. The journey to the Onyx Spire, the seat of the Alpha King, was a silent, grim affair. She traveled in a black carriage, flanked by two of the king's royal guard. They were massive wolves, their human forms radiating an aura of contained violence. They never spoke to her, but she felt their contempt like a physical weight. A wolfless omega for their king, the insult was profound. She could hear the whispers whenever the carriage stopped in a village. Faces peered through curtained windows, their expressions a mixture of pity and morbid curiosity. The broken bride, they called her. The lamb for the slaughter. Each word was a tiny cut against her already wounded pride. She held her head high, focusing on the sway of the carriage, the creak of the leather, anything to drown out the noise. The air grew colder as they ascended into the mountains. The trees became dark sentinels, their branches clawing at a sky the color of slate. Then she saw it. The Onyx Spire was not a castle. It was a scar on the landscape, a jagged tooth of black rock that stabbed at the heavens. It seemed to drink the light from the air, surrounded by a perpetual gloom that had nothing to do with the weather. Her breath caught in her throat. This was not a home. It was a tomb. The carriage rattled across a drawbridge spanning a chasm so deep she could not see the bottom. The portcullis groaned upward, a monstrous mouth opening to swallow her whole. The guards pulled her from the carriage without ceremony, their grips bruising on her arms. "The king awaits," one of them grunted, shoving her toward a pair of massive obsidian doors. Inside, the fortress was a cavern of shadows and echoes. The air was frigid, carrying the scent of old stone, cold iron, and something else, something wild and pained. It was the faint, unsettling scent of a beast in agony. Leoraine clutched the small satchel that held her only possessions, a spare dress and a worn book of fairy tales, and steeled her spine. She was a daughter of Cygnus. She might be broken, but she would not crumble. Not yet. The throne room was designed to intimidate. It was a vast, vaulted cavern of a room. The walls and floor polished black stone that reflected the torchlight like a dark, still lake. High above, narrow windows let in only slivers of the dying afternoon light. At the far end, upon a dais of carved obsidian, sat the throne, and upon the throne sat the king. Lord Dravenor was not what she expected. The whispers had painted a picture of a gnarled, twisted monster, but the man before her was brutally handsome, carved from shadow and fury. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with hair as black as a raven's wing, and eyes the color of molten silver. Power radiated from him, a palpable force that pressed down on her, making it hard to breathe. It was a predatory stillness, the calm of a storm about to break. He did not rise. He did not speak. He simply watched her approach, his silver eyes tracking her every hesitant step. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. The guards forced her to her knees, a respectful distance from the dais. The cold of the stone seeped through the thin fabric of her dress. "So this is it," he finally said. His voice was a low, rumbling baritone that vibrated through the floor, through her bones. It was a voice accustomed to command, devoid of warmth or welcome. The offering from the traitor Cygnus, a wolfless omega. He said the words, wolfless omega, as if they were a disease. The shame she had carried for years flared hot in her chest. She lifted her chin, meeting his gaze. It was a small act of defiance, but it was all she had. His lip curled in a faint, cruel smirk. "You have your mother's eyes. I remember them. They were full of fire before I extinguished it." He was speaking of the rebellion, of the day he had personally executed the men who fought alongside her father. Fear, cold and sharp, pierced through her resolve. This was not just a king. This was the man who had shattered her world. And he was looking at her as if she were nothing more than a piece of property, a spoil of war. "Leave us," he commanded the guards. The heavy doors boomed shut, leaving them alone in the cavernous silence. He rose from his throne, descending the steps with a predator's grace. He circled her, his footsteps echoing in the vast chamber. She remained on her knees, her heart hammering against her ribs. "You are to be my queen," he murmured, his voice laced with a dark, bitter amusement. A queen with no wolf, no power, no voice. A perfect symbol for this broken kingdom. He stopped in front of her, close enough that she had to crane her neck to look up at him. "You will serve your purpose. You will be a constant reminder to all who would dare defy me of the price of failure. Do you understand?" She could only nod, her throat too tight for words. "Good," he said, turning his back on her. "A servant will show you to your chambers. Do not leave them without my permission. Do not speak unless spoken to. You are mine now, little wolf." A trinket, nothing more. The first dinner was an exercise in silent terror. They sat at opposite ends of a long, dark wood table in a private dining hall. The chamber was lit only by a single candelabra between them, its flames casting long, dancing shadows that made the king look even more formidable. Servants moved like ghosts, placing dishes on the table and refilling goblets without a sound, their eyes perpetually downcast. Dravenor ate with a cold, detached precision, never looking at her. The silence was a weapon, and he wielded it expertly. Leoraine could barely bring herself to swallow. The food was rich, far grander than anything her family had been able to afford since their fall, but it tasted of ash in her mouth. She risked a glance at him, studying him from beneath her lashes. He was a portrait of perfect, menacing control. Not a single wasted movement, not a flicker of emotion in his silver eyes. But then she saw it. He reached for his goblet of wine, and for a fraction of a second, his hand trembled. It was a barely perceptible tremor, gone as quickly as it appeared, but she saw it. He clenched his fist for a moment before relaxing it, his jaw tight, a crack in the marble facade. Later, A servant dropped a silver platter with a loud clatter that echoed through the stone hall. Dravener flinched. His eyes snapped shut, and a deep line of pain creased his brow. His knuckles turned white where he gripped the edge of the table. The reaction was visceral, immediate, and utterly at odds with the unshakable composure he projected. He recovered in an instant, his expression once again an unreadable mask. He glared at the terrified servant until the poor man scrambled from the room. But Leorin had seen it. The king was not just cold. He was in pain. Some deep hidden wound lay beneath the surface of his icy control. A strange, unwelcome seed of curiosity took root in her heart. The whispers said he was cursed. For the first time, she wondered what that curse truly was. It was a dangerous thought. Pity was a luxury she could not afford, and curiosity could be a death sentence in a place like this. She lowered her gaze back to her plate, her fear now mingled with a disquieting sense of mystery. Her chambers were opulent, a gilded cage of silk sheets, plush carpets, and dark, heavy furniture. A fire crackled in a massive hearth, but it did little to chase away the bone-deep chill of the fortress. A balcony overlooked the chasm, offering a view of nothing but swirling mist and jagged rock. There was no escape. Days bled into one another in a monotonous haze. She was a prisoner, confined to her rooms and an adjoining sitting area. A stern, silent maid brought her meals and attended to her needs, but never spoke a word. The loneliness was a physical ache, a constant companion in the suffocating silence. To keep madness at bay, she explored her prison. Tucked away behind a heavy tapestry, she found a small, forgotten library. It was dusty and neglected, but it was a treasure. Books lined the walls from floor to ceiling, their leather spines cracked with age. Here, she could lose herself for hours, escaping into worlds of myth and magic, worlds where broken things could be made whole again. She spent her time reading, memorizing the old tales, and weaving new ones in her mind. The stories were her shield, her only defense against the crushing despair of her new life. They were a small, secret part of her that the Shadow King could not touch. One night, a week after her arrival, the heavy doors to her chambers were thrown open without a knock. Dravener stood there, framed in the doorway. He looked undone. His black hair was disheveled, his tunic was unlaced at the throat, and the shadows under his silver eyes were deeper than she had ever seen them. He looked like a man who had not slept in a century. "You," he rasped, his voice raw. "They say your grandmother was a story weaver." Leorain's heart leaped into her throat. "She was, my lord." He stalked into the room, his movements agitated, restless. He paced before the fire like a caged wolf. "I cannot find rest. The shadows, they do not quiet." He stopped and turned to her, his gaze piercing, desperate. "Tell me a story." The command was so unexpected, so bizarre, that she could only stare at him. "A story, my lord? Do not make me repeat myself." He snarled, a flicker of that dangerous power returning. "Tell me a story. Anything. Just fill the silence." He sank into a large armchair by the fire, burying his face in his hands. He looked utterly exhausted, the fearsome Alpha King brought low by something she could not see. Terror warred with a sliver of opportunity. This was a command, one she could not refuse, but it was also a chance to use the one skill she possessed. Her voice trembled as she began, choosing a simple tale her grandmother had often told her, a story of a star that fell in love with a mortal man, in an age before the moon held dominion over our kind. She started softly, her voice gaining strength with each word. There was a star in the heavens, brighter than all the others. She wove the tale, her words painting pictures in the air. She spoke of celestial light and earthly sorrow, of a love that defied the boundaries of night and day. As she spoke, she watched him. Slowly, miraculously, the tension began to bleed from his body. The rigid line of his shoulders softened. The fist he had clenched on the arm of the chair uncurled, finger by finger. He did not lift his head from his hands, but he was listening. The restless energy that had crackled around him subsided, replaced by a profound stillness. The silence he had commanded her to fill was now a different kind of quiet, not empty and oppressive, but calm and contemplative. She finished the story, her voice trailing off into the crackle of the fire. He did not move for a long time. She thought perhaps he had finally found the rest he sought. When he finally looked up, his silver eyes were clearer than she had ever seen them. The desperate pain lessened to a dull ache. "What was her name?" he asked, his voice quiet, stripped of its usual harshness. "The star?" Leoraine asked, surprised. She had no name. She was just light. He nodded slowly, as if the answer held some deep significance. He stood, his immense frame seeming less threatening in the soft firelight. "You will do this again tomorrow night." It was not a request. He turned and left without another word, the doors closing softly behind him, leaving Leoraine alone with the echo of his command and a dawning sense of wonder. Her useless, frivolous talent had just soothed the most feared beast in the kingdom. Their nightly ritual began. Every evening after the silent, tense dinner, Dravener would come to her chambers. He would sink into the armchair by the fire, and she would tell him a story. She spun tales of brave knights and cunning sorceresses, of forgotten gods and ancient beasts. With each story, she saw another crack appear in his armor. He started to speak to her, not much at first, just a question about a character, or a comment on a turn of phrase. Then, he began to talk about other things, the state of the grain harvest in the south, a border dispute with the mountain clans. He spoke to her as if she were not just a trinket, but a confidant. He never mentioned his curse, and she never dared to ask. One night, she told him a story about a king who carried a shard of frozen glass in his heart, making him cold to all the world until a simple girl's loyalty thawed it. When she finished, he was quiet for a long time, staring into the flames. "Do you believe such things are possible?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "That a thing, once broken, can be mended by something as fragile as a feeling?" "I believe that some things are not broken, my lord," she replied softly. "They are merely waiting for the right person to see their true shape." He looked at her then, truly looked at her, and for the first time, she did not see a king or a conqueror. She saw a man, terribly and profoundly alone. A fragile, unspoken connection was growing between them in the fire-lit darkness, a bond woven from words and shared silence. It was dangerous and terrifying, but it was also the first time in years that Leoraine had not felt completely worthless. This fragile peace, however, was not destined to last. She had been in the fortress for a month when she first met Lord Morgrith. Lord Morgrith was Dravener's uncle, his chief advisor, and a man who wore his cruelty like a fine cloak. He was older than Dravener, his face a web of fine lines, but his eyes were sharp and intelligent, missing nothing. He found Leoraine in the small library, her supposed sanctuary. "So this is the king's new pet," Morgrith said, his voice smooth and venomous. He stepped into the room, his presence immediately tainting the quiet comfort she had found there, the wolfless wonder. "I must admit, I was curious to see what sort of creature my nephew had chained himself to." Leoraine rose to her feet, her book clutched to her chest like a shield. "My lord," she murmured, inclining her head. "Spare me the pleasantries," he sneered, circling her as Dravener had done on that first day. But where Dravener's presence was a storm, Morgrith's was a creeping poison. "Tell me, what magic do you possess?" "My nephew suffers from a malady of the spirit, one that has resisted every healer and mystic in the 7 packs. Yet, rumor has it, your little bedtime stories are proving quite the potent tonic." His words were a direct hit, confirming her suspicion that Dravenor's insomnia was common knowledge, at least within the inner circle. "I only do as the king commands," she said, her voice steady despite the frantic beating of her heart. Morgrith laughed, a dry, rasping sound. "Of course you do, but understand this, little Omega. You are a temporary diversion, a plaything. He requires a true Luna, a she-wolf of power and standing, to secure his line and his throne. You are a weak link, a stain on his reign. And stains," he said, stopping directly in front of her, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, "have a way of being washed away." He left as suddenly as he had appeared, leaving her trembling in the dusty silence. The message was clear. She was not just an outsider. She was a threat to someone's power. And Lord Morgrith was not a man who tolerated threats. After her encounter with Morgrith, Leorin began to watch him more closely. She saw the subtle ways he manipulated Dravenor. During council meetings, which she was now sometimes permitted to attend, sitting silently in a corner, Morgrith would frame his suggestions as if they were Dravenor's own ideas. He would praise the king's decisiveness on brutal policies that Dravenor seemed reluctant to enact. "As you so wisely decreed, my king," Morgrith would say, "we must make an example of the grain thieves. A public flogging will remind the people of the strength of the throne." Leorain would watch Dravenor's jaw tighten. He would nod his assent, but the pain in his eyes would deepen. He was a king trapped in a web of his uncle's making, his own authority subtly and constantly undermined. Morgrith ruled through Dravenor, using the king's curse-induced isolation to consolidate his own power. One afternoon, the conflict came to a head. A delegation of alphas from the northern packs had arrived to petition the king. Morgrith insisted they were plotting sedition, urging Dravenor to imprison them as a show of force. "They question your strength, nephew," Morgrith's voice echoed in the council chamber. "They whisper of the curse, of your unfitness. They see your choice of mate," he added, with a venomous glance at Leorin, "as the final proof of your weakness. Show them they are wrong. Crush them." "I will hear them out," Dravenor said, his voice a low growl. "They are my people, not my enemies. They are wolves, and wolves only respect the fang at their throat." Morgrith shot back, his decorum finally slipping. "Your father would have had their heads on spikes before they even crossed the river." The mention of his father was a clear provocation. A dark energy exploded from Dravenor. The air in the room grew heavy, charged with ozone. The torches flickered wildly as an unseen force swept through the chamber. "Enough!" Dravenor roared, his voice distorting, becoming something deeper and more monstrous. He slammed his fist on the stone table, cracking it down the center. Without another word, he turned and stormed from the room, the shadows seeming to cling to him, to writhe around his feet. Morgrith watched him go, a thin, triumphant smile on his lips. He had gotten the reaction he wanted. He had pushed his king to the edge of his control. A terrible premonition seized Leorin. She excused herself from the stunned council and followed the path Dravenor had taken. She didn't know why. Some instinct she didn't know she possessed pulled her after him, a moth to a volatile flame. She found him in the central courtyard, a desolate space of black stone and withered trees. But it was not Dravenor who stood there. The thing in the center of the courtyard was a creature of nightmare. It was huge, vaguely wolf-like in shape, but formed of living shadow and crackling, unstable energy. It had no face, only a pair of burning, silver eyes filled with indescribable agony. Tendrils of darkness writhed from its body, lashing out to scar the stone paving. A low, guttural sound of pure pain emanated from it, a sound that was both a roar and a sob. This was his curse. This was the Shadow King's wolf. It was not a beast of pride and strength, but a monster of corrupted spirit, trapped between forms, a being of pure rage and suffering. The royal guards who had followed at a distance kept their back, their spears leveled, their faces pale with terror. They saw a monster to be contained. Leorain saw Dravenor, drowning in an agony she could not comprehend. Her heart hammered in her chest, every instinct screaming at her to run, to hide. but her feet remained planted on the stone. He was the man who listened to her stories, the man who showed her glimpses of the lonely soul beneath the crown. She could not abandon him to this. Ignoring the guard's shouted warnings, she took a step forward, and then another. She walked slowly, deliberately, toward the raging vortex of shadow and pain. The monster turned its burning silver eyes on her, and a wave of pure despair washed over her, so potent it almost brought her to her knees. She did not have claws or fangs. She had only her voice. "There was once a mountain," she began, her voice shaking but clear, "that stood so tall it scraped the stars from the sky. It was made of the hardest stone, and all the world feared its sharp peaks and its cold, dark heart." As her voice cut through the air, the creature of shadow stilled, its burning eyes fixed on her, the agonized roar softening to a low, pained growl. The writhing tendrils of darkness slowed their violent lashing. Leoraine kept walking, her gaze locked with his. She did not falter, even as the raw power radiating from him chilled her to the bone. She continued her story, her words a thread of calm in the storm of his pain. She spoke of how the mountain was lonely, how it longed for the warmth of the sun, but was always shrouded in clouds of its own making. The guards watched in stunned silence. They had only ever seen this happen from a distance, had only ever known to retreat and wait for the king's monstrous fit to pass. They had never seen anyone approach it. They had never seen it respond to anything but its own rage. She was only a few feet away now. She could feel the cold aura of his corrupted spirit on her skin. She reached the end of her impromptu tale, speaking of how a single, resilient flower grew in a crack in the mountain's stone. Its small life a spot of warmth against the cold, hard rock. And the mountain learned, she finished, her voice a near whisper, that even the deepest stone could feel the sun if it only allowed a single flower to grow. With a final, shuddering groan, the shadowy form collapsed inward. The darkness dissipated like smoke on the wind, leaving Dravener kneeling on the scarred stones, human once more. He was gasping for breath, sweat plastering his dark hair to his brow. He was pale, drained, and utterly vulnerable. He looked up at her, his silver eyes wide with a mixture of shame, disbelief, and something else, something that looked terrifyingly like hope. He had expected her to run. He had expected her to scream. He had not expected her to walk into his storm and quiet it with a story. He tried to push himself up, to regain some semblance of his royal composure. "You should not have," he began, his voice rough. "Don't," she whispered, kneeling in front of him, heedless of the cold stone or the staring guards. "It's all right. I'm here." For the first time since she had arrived, she reached out and, with a hesitant hand, touched his arm. He flinched, but he did not pull away. His skin was cold, but beneath it, she felt a tremor of life. In that moment, surrounded by the evidence of his monstrous curse, Leoraine felt not fear, but a fierce, startling wave of protectiveness. In the aftermath, something profound shifted between them. Dravener tried to send her away, to push her back to the safe confines of her rooms. "You have seen what I am," he had said, his voice raw with self-loathing. "I am a monster. It is not safe for you." "I am not afraid of you, Dravener," she replied, using his name for the first time. The sound of it on her lips felt both strange and right. He had no answer for that. The walls he had built around himself were impossibly high, but she had not tried to scale them. She had simply walked through a door he never knew was unlocked. He allowed her to stay. He allowed her to help him back to his private chambers. Leaning on her small frame, the great Alpha King humbled and exhausted. Their nightly storytelling sessions took on a new intimacy. He no longer sat across the room in a chair. He would sit on the hearthrug before the fire, and she would sit on a cushion nearby. He told her about the curse, how it had taken him on his own 19th birthday, the same day she had failed to shift. His wolf spirit had not emerged. It had shattered, corrupted by an ancient bloodline curse his ancestors had long thought dormant. It was a thing of pain, triggered by stress and rage, a constant battle for control that left him perpetually exhausted and isolated. Their bond deepened, but the world outside their fire-lit sanctuary did not stand still. Morgrith, thwarted in his attempt to expose Dravenor, devised a new, more public plan. He announced a grand feast to celebrate the king's betrothal, inviting alphas from every pack. It was, he claimed, a chance to formally introduce their future Luna. Leoraine knew it was a trap. The feast was a performance of power, and she was the main act. The hall was filled with powerful, prideful wolves, their gazes on her a mixture of curiosity and disdain. She sat beside Dravenor at the high table, feeling like an imposter in a gown of silver silk. Halfway through the feast, Morgrith stood, raising his goblet. "A toast," he declared, his voice ringing with false cheer. "To the king and his chosen bride. An unconventional choice, to be sure, but one we must all embrace. In fact, to solidify her place among us, I believe a demonstration is in order. Let our future Luna honor us with her form. Let us see the wolf that has captured our king's heart." A cruel, expectant silence fell over the hall. Every eye was on her. This was the moment Morgrith had engineered. He was calling her out, demanding she perform the one act she was incapable of. He was going to humiliate her, and by extension Dravenor, in front of the entire kingdom. Panic seized Leoraine, cold and absolute. The faces of the assembled alphas swam before her eyes. Their expressions ranged from cruel amusement to pitying contempt. This was it, the public unmasking of the broken bride. She could feel Dravenor tense beside her, a low growl rumbling in his chest. "My uncle is overzealous," Dravenor said, his voice dangerously low, trying to diffuse the situation. "The Luna is not here for your entertainment." "Nonsense, nephew," Morgrith boomed, playing to the crowd. "It is tradition. The pack must see the strength of its Luna. Or is there no strength to see?" He let the question hang in the air, a poisoned dart aimed directly at Dravenor's authority. Leoraine looked at Dravenor. She saw the storm gathering in his eyes, the shadows threatening to coalesce. Morgrith was trying to provoke him into another episode, to expose both of them at once. She could not let that happen. She would not be the cause of his downfall. Taking a deep breath, she stood, her legs trembling. She faced the silent hall. "Lord Morgrith is correct," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. "It is tradition, but I cannot fulfill it. I have no wolf to show you." Gasps and mutters rippled through the crowd. She had admitted it. The shame was a physical blow, but she bore it, standing tall. Morgrith's smile was predatory. "So, the rumors are true. The king would bind himself to a defective, an omega who cannot even perform the most basic duty of our kind." He took a step toward her, his hand raised. "This union is a mockery. She is unfit." He moved as if to strike her, to cast her down from the dais. Before his hand could land, Dravenor moved like lightning. He was in front of her in an instant, a blur of black and silver. He caught Morgrith's wrist in an iron grip, his eyes blazing with a fury that was entirely his own, not the curse's. "You will not touch her," Dravenor snarled, his voice vibrating with absolute power. The entire hall recoiled from the force of his alpha command. He shoved his uncle back, sending the older wolf stumbling. Dravenor turned to face the stunned alphas, keeping Leoraine protectively behind him. "You wish to see the strength of your Luna?" he roared, his voice filling every corner of the vast hall. "Her strength is not in her claws or her fangs. It is in her heart. It is in a courage that none of you possess. She stood before you and spoke the truth, knowing you would scorn her for it. She has faced my darkness without flinching. She is 10 times the wolf any of you are." He turned, his silver eyes finding hers. In front of his treacherous uncle and the entire assembly of nobles, he gently took her hand. "She is not merely my bride," he declared, his voice ringing with unshakable conviction. "She is my choice. She is my mate." and you will show her the respect she is due as your queen." The feast ended in a tense, shocked silence. Morgrith had been publicly humiliated, and the Alphas had been put on notice. Dravenor had not just defended her, he had defied 1,000 years of tradition for her. He had chosen her, with all her perceived flaws, over the expectations of his entire world. Later, in the quiet of his chambers, the adrenaline faded, leaving them both raw and exposed. The fire crackled, the only sound in the room. Dravenor stood by the window, staring out at the unending darkness. "What you did tonight," Leorin began, her voice thick with emotion. "I only spoke the truth," he said, turning to face her. The emotional turmoil of the evening had left him drained, his defenses down. "They don't see you, Leorin. They look at you and see a lack of something. A wolfless girl. When I look at you," he trailed off, taking a step closer. "When I look at you, I see the light that holds back my shadows. I see the only peace I have known since I was a boy. You are not a lack of something. You are everything." His confession hung in the air between them, more intimate than any touch. He was so close now she could see the flicker of the flames reflected in his silver eyes. He looked at her not as a king, not as a master, but as a man laid bare. He lifted a hand, his fingers gently brushing a strand of hair from her face. His touch was hesitant, reverent. "I have been in the dark for so long," he whispered, his voice rough with a pain that tore at her heart. "And you are like the dawn." He leaned in, his gaze dropping to her lips. Her heart stopped. This was it, the culmination of all the stolen moments, the shared stories, the quiet understanding. She tilted her head up, her eyes fluttering closed, waiting for the kiss that would seal the unspoken truth between them. A frantic pounding on the chamber door shattered the moment. "My king," a guard's panicked voice called out. "An urgent message! Lord Morgrith, he is rallying the Northern Alphas. He speaks of treason, of deposing a king unfit to rule." The spell was broken. Dravenor pulled back, the vulnerable man disappearing, replaced once more by the warrior king. The external threat had come for them, just as they were about to find their resolution. The war for his throne, and for their future, had just begun. The days leading up to the bonding ceremony were fraught with a tension that was thicker than the mountain mist. The onyx spire was a fortress preparing for war. Dravenor met constantly with his loyal commanders, while reports flooded in of Morgrith, spreading dissent, painting Dravenor as a weak, cursed king enthralled by a defective Omega. The bonding ceremony was the final, formal ritual to make their union official and unbreakable in the eyes of their law and magic. It was also, Leoraine knew, the perfect stage for Morgrith's final move. He would not allow the bond to be sealed. She felt a new strength hardening within her. The fear that had been her constant companion for so long had been burned away by the fires of Dravenor's declaration. She was his choice, his mate. She would not be the weakness that brought him down. She would be his shield. She spent her time not in the library, but in the castle's archives, poring over ancient texts about the royal bloodline and shifter magic. She searched for anything about his curse, any mention of a shadow wolf. She found fragmented references, whispers of a malediction placed on his ancestor for a great betrayal, a curse that corrupted the wolf spirit, turning it inward, making it a source of agony instead of strength. There was no mention of a cure. The night before the ceremony, Dravenor found her there, asleep with her head on an open book. He gently woke her, his touch now familiar and comforting. "You should be resting," he murmured, his eyes full of concern. "I was looking for a weapon," she admitted. "A way to fight what's coming." He knelt before her, taking her hands in his. "Leoraine, the weapon I need is already here." He looked into her eyes. "Your courage is my weapon. Your presence is my armor. Whatever Morgrith has planned, we will face it together." He lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a soft kiss to her knuckles. "Tomorrow, you will be my queen. no matter what. The great hall was arranged for the ceremony. An ancient stone altar stood in the center, carved with runes of binding and fealty. The loyal alphas and their packs stood on one side, a grim but determined gallery. On the other side stood the northern alphas whom Morgrith had swayed, their faces hard and judgmental. Morgrith himself stood among them, his expression one of polite, venomous concern. Leoraine walked to the altar, Dravenor at her side. She wore a simple white gown, a stark contrast to the oppressive black stone of the hall. She met the hostile glares of the northern alphas with a calm she did not feel. Dravenor's hand was a warm, steady presence on the small of her back. The elder began the rite, his voice chanting the ancient words of the pact. It was a long ritual, filled with symbolic gestures. The final part required the couple to drink from a shared ceremonial chalice, a brew of herbs meant to strengthen the spiritual bond between mates. As the chalice was presented, Morgrith stepped forward. "A moment, elder," he said smoothly. "As the king's uncle, it is my honor and my right to offer a personal blessing to this union." He produced a small, ornate vial, an ancient family tradition. A drop of this elixir, from the sap of the moon petal flower, ensures a strong and fertile bond. Dravenor's guards tensed, but Morgrith's actions were cloaked in tradition. To refuse would be a grave insult. Dravenor gave a stiff nod, his eyes narrowed with suspicion. Morgrith uncorked the vial and let a single shimmering drop fall into the chalice. He smiled, a victor's smile, and stepped back into the crowd. The elder offered the chalice to Dravenor. He drank, then passed it to Leoraine. She hesitated for only a second before raising it to her lips and drinking as well. The liquid was sweet, but with a bitter, metallic aftertaste. For a moment, nothing happened. "Then," Dravenor gasped. His hand flew to his chest, and he staggered back from the altar. The shadows in the room seemed to rush toward him, to writhe and cling to his form. A dark, corrupted energy began to pour from him, and the agonized roar of his shadow beast tore through the hall. The poison was not meant to kill him, she realized in a flash of horror. It was designed to unleash the monster, to drive him into a final, uncontrollable rage in front of everyone. Panic erupted. The northern alphas drew their blades, their worst fears confirmed. Morgrith's voice rose above the chaos. "The curse has consumed him. He is a monster. For the good of the kingdom, he must be put down." Guards formed a defensive circle, their spears pointed at their own king. Dravenor thrashed on the ground, his body contorting as the shadow form fought to take over completely. He was engulfed in a storm of darkness, his silver eyes glowing with a terrifying feral light. He was losing. The poison was accelerating the curse, feeding the rage, drowning the man. His internal world was a vortex of pain. The shadow beast, fueled by the poison, screamed for release, for destruction. It showed him images of his enemies, Morgrith, the sneering alphas, and urged him to tear them apart, to unleash his agony upon them. It was a tempting call. The rage promised an end to the pain, a moment of terrible, absolute power. But through the red haze of fury, he saw her, Leoraine. She was not running. She was not screaming. She was standing by the altar, her face pale but her expression resolute. She was watching him, not with fear, but with unwavering faith. Her image was an anchor in the hurricane of his soul. To give in to the rage would be to destroy everything, including her. The beast might kill his enemies, but it would also terrify the one person who had ever looked at him and not seen a monster. Protect her. The thought was a single point of light in the overwhelming darkness. He fought back. He turned the battle inward, wrestling with his own corrupted spirit, enduring the unimaginable agony of the poison and the curse to keep the monster chained, to keep it from touching her. It was the hardest fight of his life, a war waged not for a throne, but for the soul of the woman he loved. Leoraine saw the struggle in his eyes. She saw the man fighting the monster within. Morgrith was shouting for the guards to attack, to kill the beast while it was writhing on the floor. She knew she had only moments, She walked past the line of guards, ignoring their warnings, and stepped into the circle of seething shadow. The raw, pained energy washed over her, but she did not flinch. She knelt beside Dravner's convulsing form. She placed her hands on the monstrous, shifting darkness that was his shoulder. It felt like touching a storm, cold and chaotic. She leaned in close, her voice a clear, steady whisper that cut through his roars of pain. "Kiss me once before the ceremony ends." The words were part of the formal rite, meant to be spoken at the very end, but she said them now as a plea, an anchor, a promise. He stilled for a barest second, his glowing eyes focusing on her. He had heard her. Then, she began her final, most powerful story. She did not weave a tale of ancient kings or mythical creatures. She told their story. "There was once a king who lived in a castle of shadow," she began, her voice resonating with a power she had never felt before. It was not magic in the way of sorcerers, but the pure, unassailable magic of truth and love. He was strong and proud, but a curse had stolen his light, leaving him alone in the dark. He believed he was a monster. He believed he was lost. As she spoke, a soft, warm light began to emanate from her hands, from her very being. It was not the glittering, frivolous magic of her childhood imaginings, but a steady, gentle glow, the color of dawn. It seeped into the writhing shadows, not fighting them, but soothing them. Then a girl with no magic of her own was sent to him, she continued, tears streaming down her face. She was broken too, in her own way. She was wolfless in a world of wolves, but she did not see a monster in the king's darkness. She saw a man in pain. She saw his light, buried deep beneath his wounds. And she wasn't afraid. The violent thrashing subsided. The terrible roars softened into a low groan. The light from her hands grew brighter, enveloping them both. It was the magic of acceptance. It wasn't healing the curse. It was integrating it. It was telling the man and the beast that they did not have to be at war, that they could be one. Her love was not a cure, Leorin whispered, her forehead pressed against the dissipating shadow. It was a mirror to show him he was never a monster. He was just a king, waiting for his queen. The last of the shadows dissolved. Dravener lay on the stone floor, his human form whole and still. The poison had been purged. He pushed himself onto his elbows, his breathing ragged but even. He looked up at her, and for the first time, his silver eyes were completely clear, free from the haze of pain and rage. The curse was not gone, but it was dormant, quieted by a power greater than any hate. He reached up, his hand cupping her cheek. Then, in front of the silent, awestruck hall, he pulled her down and kissed her. It was a kiss of desperation and gratitude, of salvation and promise. He kissed her, and the ancient runes on the altar stone flared with a brilliant silver light, sealing their bond forever. When the light faded, a stunned silence held the hall. Dravener rose to his feet, pulling Leorain up with him. He looked at Morgrith, his expression like glacial ice. "Treason," he said, his voice calm but carrying the weight of absolute authority. "And the use of forbidden poisons against your king. Seize him." The northern alphas, who had been moments from attacking their king, now turned on Morgrith, their faces masks of fury and shame. They had been manipulated, their honor used against them. Morgrith tried to flee, but he was surrounded. He was dragged away, screaming curses and threats that no one listened to. Dravenor turned back to Leorain. Without a word, he gently tilted her head to the side. The crowd watched, breathless, as he leaned in and sank his canines into the soft flesh where her neck met her shoulder. The mating mark. A jolt of pure energy, warm and silver, shot through Leorain, binding her to him, soul to soul. The bond was complete. She was his, and he was hers. He was no longer just the Alpha King. He was her Alpha, and she, the wolfless Omega, was his Luna Queen. He rested his forehead against hers, his eyes closed. "My queen," he murmured, his voice thick with an emotion so deep it left her breathless. The entire hall, from the lowest servant to the most powerful alpha, dropped to one knee. Not in fear, but in genuine, awestruck reverence for the queen who had saved their king with a story. Their union marked the beginning of a new era. Dravenor, with Leoraine's counsel, began to transform the kingdom. The harsh, brutal laws that Morgrith had championed were repealed, replaced with edicts that valued compassion and justice. Strength was redefined. It was no longer just about the power of one's wolf, but about the resilience of one's spirit, the courage of one's heart. Leoraine became a beloved queen. She established schools. She listened to the petitions of the small folk, and she sought out the other wolfless members of their society who had lived their lives in shame and hiding. She gave them positions of honor in her court, showing the world that one's worth was not determined by the beast within. Dravenor's wolf never again manifested as the shadow monster. The curse remained a part of him, a darkness he carried, but it was no longer in control. It was a quiet shadow at his back, a reminder of the pain he had overcome, and of the woman whose love had been his salvation. He ruled with a wisdom and grace his people had never seen, his every decision tempered by Leoraine's empathy. The onyx spire, once a place of fear and gloom, began to feel like a home. 1 year later, Leoraine stood on the balcony of her chambers. It was no longer a cage, but a cherished perch from which she could watch the sun set over her thriving kingdom. The chasm below was no longer a symbol of isolation. Dravenor had ordered a bridge to be built, connecting the spire to the lands below, a symbol of their new, open reign. Strong arms wrapped around her from behind, and Dravenor's chin came to rest on her shoulder. He placed a hand gently over her swollen belly. "He's kicking," Dravenor murmured against her ear, his voice filled with a quiet joy that still made her heart ache with love. Leoraine corrected him with a smile, turning in his arms to face him. "She is going to be a storyteller, like her mother, or a king who can move mountains, like her father," he countered, his silver eyes sparkling with a happiness she had once thought impossible. He leaned down and kissed her softly. The peace they had fought so hard for was real, tangible in the warm evening air. Their child, a miracle they had been told could never happen between a cursed alpha and a wolfless omega, was a symbol of their impossible, world-changing love. They had taken a broken kingdom, a broken king, and a broken girl, and from the pieces, they had built a future. The Shadow King was a shadow no more, and the wolfless Omega had found her true power, not in a wolf, but in the strength of her own heart. They were whole, they were happy, and their story was just beginning.